Aloha mai kako. How are you all today? It's very nice to see everybody. So I'm Lyz Soto. I'm going to acknowledge that I'm a little out of it this morning, but I am your moderator for this panel. And we have three amazing people who do a lot of work on militarization and demilitarization activism. And so I think we're gonna have a wonderful, well, that doesn't really apply, really, but we're gonna have a really interesting conversation. So Kajihiro is an assistant professor of ethnic studies at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa and a board member of Hawaiʻi Peace and Justice and the coordinator of the Hawaiʻi Detours Project. Kim Compoc teaches Filipinx American history and the history of U.S. empire at UH West Oahu and is affiliated with the International Women's Network Against Militarism. I notice you haven't, do you want me to read out the @genuine? Yeah, okay, so Instagram plug, @genuine _security. And then Kawenaʻulaokalā Kapahua is a community organizer with Hui Aloha Aina o Honolulu and a PhD student in the political science program. Wow, that was a weird slip. At UH Manoa. So more coffee will be had on my end, and then Kim is going to take it away. Mahalo.
First of all, thank you all for being here Sunday morning, a 9 o'clock panel. Mahalo to the organizers for this. I feel really privileged to be here on the main stage talking to all of you. I see so many friends in the audience. I'm gonna try my best not to overtalk because we really do wanna hear from you and connect and hopefully just build our movement stronger and stronger, yeah? So my name's Kim Compoc. I'll start with a little bit on my genealogy and then my activist genealogy and then some thoughts for the future. My genealogy. Filipino heritage on my father's side, Kahuku family. 2020 marked our 100-year anniversary in Hawaii. And that was, I teach history, and so thinking about centennials and that kind of thing, that was kind of interesting to me. I'm one of, there's a lot of Filipino families where people go back and forth, between the Philippines and Hawaii. And my family's not like that. It's pretty much, we came here and we never looked back. And so it's a little bit odd, maybe, that we have this historian in the family. And I think that I went around thinking, after I learned about 1898, I went around thinking that maybe this is elite knowledge. Maybe the fact that the Philippine-American War even occurred is something that is only being talked about at the university, because it sure isn't being talked about in my family, even among the veterans, and they're in the dozens. And so last year, I've only been to the Philippines twice, and there's only like 2 of us that have gone at all that I know of that were not military connected trips. And so I went last year, in 1994, I went to explore my Lolo's side, my grandfather's side, but last year I went to visit my Lola's hometown, Balilihan, Bohol. And I don't know what level of naivete I was working with, but it wasn't until last year, this is post-PhD, that I learned that the Americans actually burned her church to the ground, the church that she was baptized in 1901. And I was like, I knew they had burned churches. I mean, I knew that they had burned schools. I knew that there had been horrific, concentration camps and mass slaughter and everything, but the burning of churches somehow, just arrested me, the level of naivete of what we're really dealing with when we say U.S. empire and genocide. I think I'm constantly having to remind myself to shake out of the naivete. And I think that the slaughter that's happening in Palestine is another reminder of that. I'm still trying to get over 2021, was it, when they killed 500 children then, and now we're at, what, is it 15,000 children? It's just numbers that just are constantly having to recoach myself. This is what we're dealing with. So yeah, a little bit on, I guess, genealogy as a pathway to understand our current conditions, you know? And I think a lot for my students at UH West Oahu, a lot of Filipinx, a lot of Hawaiians, a lot of Okinawans, a lot of everybody, Black folks too, and a lot of militarized folks, you know, who don't, like my family, have the language to understand how we have joined the army, joined the military of our colonizer, you know, and giving people safe spaces to share those sacred stories and to act differently, you know. I think that that's a big part of what I do. So I'm affiliated with the International Women's Network Against Militarism, and I just want to speak a little bit to some of my, you know, activist genealogy in that way. I can't be here without mentioning Noenoe Silva. I got to be the moderator on a panel with her yesterday. Is she here? She's in the other one. All right, I won't embarrass her by saying this in front of her, but it wasn't until Aloha Betrayed. And it was the first time I saw a picture of Aguinaldo and Liliuokalani side by side in a Hawaiian book written by a Hawaiian. And, you know, on one page is the images of those quote unquote pickaninny cartoons that the racist press had drawn of our, you know, of our leaders. And then on the other side, how they represented themselves, you know, and kind of visual sovereignty, you know, and that kind of thing. And I'm just so indebted to her for that book. And the connections she was making, even with those two, you know, with those combinations of like, and she mentioned it, she was like, why did the Americans want Hawaii? You know, what sealed the deal between 1893 and 1898? Having that fueling station for their dreams of war all over Asia. And we're still dealing with the fuel issue here with Red Hill. And now 1/3 of the fuel is in Subic. So, you know, these legacies are with us, you know, for centuries. I want to say too, in terms of, you know, the activist genealogies, this is where I met Hanani K. Trask, right here, Pacific Women's Poetry in 2008. So to Noenoe's point about, you know, UH Manoa being still, despite everything, a place of decolonial possibility and fomenting decolonial dreams. And I hope that that's what, you know, we're all here to do, to take account of the colonizers' crimes, yeah, to not forget. That's part of our job, I think, as educators, but then to also hold the space for anti-colonial, decolonial dreaming, yeah, and worlds of abundance and care. And to the extent that feminist and queer and trans visions can also be part of that nourishing, I'm here for that. I just wanted to rewind too, in terms, I've been on this island since 2010, and for that part I've been pretty much dedicated to, you know, growing the Women's Voices Women Speak, which is an offshoot of HPJ. Thank you, Kyle, for your loving work and helping to nurture those early years. It's our 20th year. 2004 is when it all got kicked off, so this is our 20th year. I've only been here since 2010, so I just wanted to acknowledge it was 10 years ago that I went to Elima Long, who's part of Hui Loha Aina and was on the organizing committee for Lohoʻihoʻi Ea, and I said, hey, can I put together a panel on 1898? She goes, yeah, sure, let's do it. And now we have all this. You know, that was the first one, but it felt kind of new or something at Lohoʻihoʻi to be doing that and to kind of like think about this legacy there. 2014 was also the year that Auntie Terry Keko'olani, who was one of the, you know, co-founders of Women's Voices, Women Speak, said, you know, we need a retreat of Filipino women and Hawaiian women talking about building our pilina. Hawaiian women need to know about what happened in the Philippines. Filipino women need to know deeper about the Hawaiian situation. Let's be together, you know. And so we, Bernadette was there, Kiani Fernandez was there, Aiko Yamashiro was there. A lot of folks, not just Filipinos and Hawaiians. But that was really, really meaningful to me, and that planted the seeds for me to, you know, write the stuff that I write. It was also the year that Jennifer Laude was murdered. I won't say how she was murdered. I'll let you look that up on your own. But she was murdered by a transphobic US Marine in a place called Olongapo. And I was really privileged last year to be there in Subic with the International Women's Network, and we had a vigil. How long do I have? 10? And we did a vigil not just for her, but for all the women who've been killed outside the bases. And so when I think about what does it mean to do demilitarization work, I think mourning has got to be part of it. And I think holding those vigils in a way that is really beautiful is really key. I think demilitarization work, period, is really tough because what you're asking people to look at is really ugly. It's catastrophic. And so I think the spaces that we make to look at that really ugly information has to be beautiful. Has to be, because just surviving capitalism is pretty freaking ugly. So yeah, so what do we do in Women's Voices? Not nearly enough. I wish each of us had like 100-person staff to really, take down the empire, topple the patriarchy, build the kind of futures we need. But we do a lot of artivism. So proud to be here with Lyz Soto. I made this quilt we call the Genuine Security Blanket. Last summer we did a Council Rimpack theater troupe. Takeshi was there, several folks were here. We performed that at La Hawaiʻi. I do a character called Secretary Will Whitewash. I'm glad to know you. And basically I get to spoof all of my white uncles who are in the military, and so proud to be there, spreading the love and evil of U.S. empire. Maybe I'll just leave it there. Yeah, please, especially with the climate catastrophe, I'll just say, everybody, whatever your dreams are, young, old, your first time doing something political, your 1000th time doing political, if it's something you dream about doing, please do it. Do it, and make it beautiful. We need your voice. Mahalo.
Hello, everyone. So we were told this was like a talk story, and don't prepare any presentations, so I just have notes. I think what Kim started us off with, with a personal genealogy, political genealogy, I think that's a good way for me to also talk about this issue, because it has been a process of discovery for me, and it's a constant learning process, and also a process of learning how I situate myself in Hawaii as someone of Japanese ancestry. I'm 4th generation, and I grew up right down the hill in Mo'iliili. And knowing that the Japanese in Hawaii have constructed our identity and so much around proving patriotism in war, and so many of the opportunities that have come to our community economically and socially have been climbing a ladder based on militarization. I feel like it's a constant sort of unlearning and undoing of those structures and trying to adjust the more fundamental contradiction. And I guess, so let's see. I didn't have a political family growing up. My parents were pretty straightforward American, and in our family we didn't have 442nd World War II veterans or incarcerees. So we didn't have that sort of trauma that burdened many other families. But instead, I just wanted to surf and have fun growing up in Hawaii, in this beautiful place. But I always had this kind of nagging feeling that something was wrong. And it wasn't until I went away to college in Oregon that it sort of made more sense, because that was the first place I was called a Jap, a Gook, a Chink. I saw white supremacists kill an Ethiopian man and then want to take over the Pacific Northwest as a Aryan homeland. And I think that was when I had a wake-up call that I needed to get active on these issues. It wasn't a something I just did recreationally. It was a necessity that we had solidarity. And if you know, Portland is a very white city, and so all us people of color had to get together and organize. And so that's kind of my roundabout way that I made my way back to Hawaii. When I worked with folks with the American Friends Service Committee there, that was one of the few places where we had people of color staff doing work in the Black community, Latino community, and some solidarity on Philippines, Pacific Islands, a Palauan community that was doing anti-nuclear work. And so I kind of found a small political home and got involved in organizing and also, art making around that time. In 1992 was the quincentennial of the Columbus, quote unquote, invasion or discovery of America. And so we made a mural that commemorated 500 years of resistance, and we toured that around the schools. But I got involved in some labor organizing as well. And during this time, the Central American Solidarity Movement in Portland was quite strong. There was a engineer from Portland that was killed by the Contras. And so it kind of was like a crystallizing moment, I think, for a lot of folks in Oregon, and made me start to think about, well, if the US can do dirty wars in Latin America and overthrow governments, that's what happened in Hawaii. And how come we're not learning about it as an ongoing problem? And so I started to reach back and reach some of my mentors, Haunani K. Trask, Kawenaʻulaokalā, Kame'elehiva, folks involved with Kalahui Hawaiʻi. At that time was one of the largest groups, and we formed chapters in the continent to do organizing around Hawaiian sovereignty issues. So when I came home in '96, I started working for the American Friends Service Committee, which has a little house in Manoa, and part of my portfolio was demilitarization. So if you know the AFSC, it's a Quaker peace and social justice organization. Started in Hawaii in 1968 to do anti-war work and counter sort of GI conscientious objector counseling. But it soon had to address the problem of military occupation, because this is where the techniques of killing were perfected and then sent over to Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And this is also where a strong GI resistance movement was happening. And when you start to look at how the US uses Hawaii, it becomes clear that all of these lands that were taken as a result of the overthrow, as a result of the so-called annexation, have been weaponized, right? Hawaii became a weapon of American empire and a pivot. So we started to do work on this question of militarization, first in Kawenaʻulaokalā, 1976. Staff people and committee members of AFSC were part of that early landing and organizing, and it kind of continued into working with the community in Waianae around Makua Valley. And so when I came on staff, that was some of the first things we worked on, was just to do the education and outreach, help to build community, some kind of structure that could continue the work. And as a result of that work, I think we've had some wins, including no live fire training for 20 years, and a commitment from the military to not do live fire in Makua again. So let's see. The Hawaii as a pivot of American empire, I think, and this is the theme of this conference around 1898. I think Hawaii was a key site, not that it was exceptional in any way, but I think it had some particular characteristics about what happened here that shaped American power overseas. So, for example, Manifest Destiny makes its march across the North American continent and sort of leaps over the ocean, right? It projects this idea of indigeneity as less than, as something that needs to be conquered. And that comes with that kind of frontier imaginary. But you also have certain limits to that, and this is where the Monroe Doctrine makes a pivot in 1843 to the Tyler Doctrine, right? It's basically a new mode of imperial sovereignty where the US is more sovereign than these other sovereign countries and will intervene when it needs to, if it needs to. And so Hawaii becomes part of the Monroe Doctrine, where a sovereign state can be overthrown and becomes the first regime change. And then we see the regime change happen again and again in Guatemala and in Iran and all these other places around the world. It's also a pivot of sea power. So Alfred Mahan, mapping out how the U.S. needs to control the Pacific, needs to control the seas to become this great power. And then but it's also a modulating point between these different modes of sovereignty. So instead of, when 1898 happens, that moment, and the acquisition of these other colonies in the Caribbean and the Pacific, Hawaii becomes a point where it, through the insular cases, becomes an incorporated territory, whereas Guam and Philippines, Puerto Rico are unincorporated. So like racialized differences in these populations become part of the calculus of like the degree to which it's assimilable to the United States. And because of the white settler vanguard that was already here in Hawaii, Hawaii becomes more assimilable in the U.S. imaginary. And that gets used against us and against other peoples, right? The shifting mode of sovereignty that happens, where you can have, on the one hand, COFA states, or an independent state like Cuba with a permanent military presence, or these unincorporated territories. So all of that difference becomes useful, I think, for American empire, the ability to improvise with its tactics. So this is where I think American imperialism is a transnational phenomena, global phenomenon, that during our work, we had to realize how to struggle against this. Couldn't just be a local fight. Even though we have had important wins with Kanaloa, Kaho'olawe, some of that training shifted to the Northern Marianas and the Farallon, Demilitarization Islands. When we have other wins in the Pacific, it gets shifted around. So I want to tell a story about Atwood Makanani. Some of you might know him. He's one of the Kaho'olawe veterans, but also someone who's sailed on the Hokulea. And one day, I think it was in 1999, or about 2000. So 1999, there was a bomb that killed a civilian worker in Vieques, Puerto Rico, David Sanes. Terry Keko'olani and I went on a delegation soon after that when the protests were peaking, and we went to Vieques with this delegation, visited with folks that were in the bombing range, and saw the devastation, but also brought back this kind of spirit of resistance and saw the creativity in their struggle. And so the next year, we organized some other folks from Hawaii. We said, we need Kaho'olawe activists to go. So Atwood Makanani and Manny Kulaloya were two from Hawaii who went in 2000. Maka reached out to us soon after we came back. He was like, hey, what are we going to do about Vieques? Right? Because he knew that Kaho'olawe had a relationship with Puerto Rico. He knew that in the 70s, some of the activists from PKO, the PKO had gone and expressed solidarity and come back. And so he said, you gotta haku. I remember he called me up one night. He said, there's a meeting to talk about Makua, what we're gonna do with Makua. He wanted to catch a ride with me. So we were driving out to Waianae. He goes, you gotta haku. And I was like nodding, and I was like, okay, I thought I knew. I didn't really know. But then I'm thinking about it as like, this sort of the composing, the weaving together of struggles, of stories to create something new out of this. And that's the only way that we will be able to restrain this monstrosity that the U.S. imperial formation is. And so I just want to say on the demilitarization part, what Kim was saying about how it's always looking into this, so into the abyss, into the horror of what's happened. It's heavy, but I think it's necessary work. And as someone who's a settler in Hawaii, I feel like that's some kuleana that I can and should carry, which is dismantling or exposing the structures of violence that maintain the occupation. So by challenging and confronting militarism, that's something that I can and should be doing. So the D part of it, right? And then just to remember our wins. So Kaho'olawe is one. We shut down Red Hill. So that's all you. Right? And on Friday, when the Board of Land and Natural Resources was hearing a motion to authorize the appraisal of these lease lands that expire in 2029, There was a stack of 500 testimonies that came in. They went from 3 o'clock till 6:30 of testimonies, and they decided to defer that action. And so the leases is an opening that we have really to get these Hawaiian trust lands returned, right? So we have to keep our eye on that. We have to watch the sneaky moves that are happening in the shadows. But this is an opportunity, and we also have to watch that they don't play us off each other. I think Makua is going to be played off of Pohakuloa, so we have to really pay attention to that. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone. Really glad to be here at the halau with you this morning in this hallowed church of anti-imperialism. I always hate following these two because it feels like you have to talk after the encyclopedia has just like laid forth its knowledge. But yeah, I think I'm going to follow Kim and Kyle's example a little bit with the genealogy. My family, my Hawaiian side of my family has obviously been here since long time ago. The Star Wars scroll would go forever. But then the rest of my family that's here, you know, like many of us came from the plantations, and it's all products of anti-imperialism, right? You know, the fact that, or products of imperialism being here. But also in their own right, products of anti-imperialism. You know, my Chinese side, part of them went back to China right around the time of the overthrow to go take part in the Kuomintang and fighting, and, you know, helping with the unification of China and pushing back against U.S. imperialism. And then my Japanese side, around World War II, you know, their last names were Nakamura, and then they changed their last name to McFarlane, which I don't know if any of you know is not a traditional Japanese name, but they changed it to hide from U.S. internment camps. You know, that, you know, they lived in Hilo and they wanted to maintain their property, and, you know, they didn't want to be shipped off, and so they, you know, changed their last name, and then moved out into the countryside so that they wouldn't be seen as often, and on paper they would look like any other family. But, you know, we have these stories amongst all of our families of people who either came to Hawaii or from Hawaii who have overcome these systems of imperialism and colonialism in big ways and in small ways. You know, whether it's figuring out how to maintain our family's control of our land, of just keeping the family house, or of going back to the homeland to fight against the colonial powers that have really ripped and carved up our own homes. And so, yeah, I being in this place today, and, you know, all of the predecessors of ours that have come before us in this place to kind of chart the map forward of what it looks like for us to take on empire, and for all of you who are educators, of educating the next generation of what it means to take on empire and their kuleana in this struggle. I kind of want to bring that into this conversation as well. And I liked what was said earlier in the introduction of de-siloing our movements. And I kind of want to bring that into this conversation as well, because I think that is crucially important, especially in this focus of this conference of 1898, because, you know, commonly, you know, I think we in Hawaii talk about 1898 as our loss of independence, as our annexation and all of these things, but and you know, there's some conversation about the reason that we were taken is to aid in these other things, but we really need to kind of center that you know, not just our own struggle here, but the fact that our oppression was integral to the oppression of these other places around the globe, not just in the Pacific, and kind of bring that forward as, you know, a necessity of ours in fighting that. We cannot fight this alone when the reason for our fight is because we were used as a tool against others. And so, like Kyle talked about with Ko'olave and Pohakuloa, you know, in decentering ourselves in this struggle, I want us to think about, you know, one of the things I work on besides demilitarization is independence. And that, you know, obviously independence is necessary for the benefits of our next generations, not just for those of us who are alive who want to see it, but for the better futures for those who come after us. But also, there's a kuleana in independence, not just of like good governance and democracy or whatever. No, there's a kuleana of independence to others, not just in Hawaii, not just to our next generation, not just to our ancestors who fought for it too, but for every group of people in the world who suffer because of our lack of independence. So, you know, Kim talked about Palestine, and you know, we talked about Ko'olave, of how the U.S. military uses Ko'olave to bomb, but it wasn't just the U.S. military bombing Ko'olave. It's not just the U.S. military training on Pohakuloa today, right? They bring their friends. You know, the Hall of Fame of human rights abusers. You have the Philippines, you have Indonesia, you have Israel who comes, which I think all of us should remember as RIMPAC comes around again this year. You know, and because of our inability to govern ourselves, our lack of sovereignty over our land, others suffer because of it, right? The U.S. brings these groups here and trains them in their tools of oppression, on our land, utilizes our land as the training ground, and then they take, these other nations take those lessons back and use them on the Palestinians who are now suffering in Gaza, on the West Papuans who are suffering in West Papua, the peasants in the Philippines who now suffer under another Marcos dictatorship. And not just, in these other places, but, Canada has been a part of this, another wonderful human rights abuser of indigenous people, all over the world, right? Hawaiʻi has become not just this hub of US projection of power, but it's integral to the projection of power of others. And so, in order to counter that, why would we fight this international united front of imperialists on our own? It would be incredibly counterproductive to try and take this on our own and see our liberation as out for ourselves. And so, one of the things I want us to bring forward in this is not just a need for us to talk about it and learn about it, but also, similar with this conference, of building these connections to other places and de-siloing our own struggle, because it benefits all of us that we can share these stories. Particularly, I think, Puerto Rico and Guåhan and Cuba, especially as other island nations, who have continued to suffer under U.S. imperialism. I think it's important for us to have these conversations, because at the end of the day, our conditions are incredibly similar. And I think that, if we want to understand what we're going to be continuing to deal with, we need to look at each other's history, and also what each other have done that succeeded. I think for some reason, under my name on the bios was like Hawaiʻi and Cuba, I guess because I went once. But I think one of the important things of, Cuba doesn't get talked about a lot in our circles. We talk generally more about the Pacific, so we leave out Cuba and Puerto Rico sometimes, but Puerto Rico comes in because of Vieques. But I think we think about these things because if we don't, we're going to learn the same lessons, right? If we want to learn of what happens when we start pushing out the U.S. military, what happens when we start pushing back against a U.S. foreign agenda. Well, let's look at Cuba. We see what happens with them with sanctions and these kind of things, of how these larger continental nations deal with rowdy, little rebellious island nations, right? And what that means for us as a people to have to face that. And so I think it's important for us to build these connections out and learn from that, because if we don't, we will suffer the same consequences. But not just that, we can also see their successes and see the dreams that we can cultivate out of what comes of that, of what it means to pivot our economy, because Cuba had a very similar economy to ours pre the revolution, of tourism and military. Guantanamo is still there, but there was a heavier military presence before. And what it means to pivot that economy away from those things to more self-sustaining ones. For Cuba, it was a necessity because of the sanctions. They had to feed their own people. They had to create their own things, because otherwise they wouldn't get them. For us, we need to think about it in a similar way with the lens of aloha, right? We always talk about self-sustainability, about food sovereignty, about feeding our people again, about taking care of ourselves, of disconnecting ourselves from this hyper-consumptionist capitalist economy and stuff like that feeds out into the rest of the world's exploitation. We need to look at what those means for us, right? The lo'i out here, I think, is a great example of what it means for us to take that back on a small scale. We have to dream bigger than that, for sure. We have to dream beyond the university, because within these ivory towers, we need to think beyond it, of what it means for us to create material change out in the world, out not just out across of Dole Street, but down in Waikiki and Waianae and Kalihi. And I think the action that we must start taking is that these struggles are ongoing, right? We need to honor the legacies of those who came before, but not, I have one of my coworkers has a great saying of not honoring our masterpiece, right? Or not honoring our masterpiece, not being obsessive with our masterpiece, right? Not looking back at the work we've already done and being like, amazing, I can rest now. No. I don't know about you, I don't feel too restful working 9 to 5 every day and just being exhausted and all of that stuff, and then also having to rent my own land. But I think that conversations about moving us forward needs to come from a place of kuleana, right? Not just of, learning all that you can for yourself. No. Noi, was brought up earlier, she has a great thing that she always talks about in classes. We're not at a place where you can study things for fun, right? If you're in the university, if you're in an educational space, you're not in a place where you can study for fun. Whatever you're doing has to have a purpose, a wider purpose, beyond yourself, right? It has to serve the people. It has to serve our community. It has to, in some way, shape, or form, empower the next generation to take the next step. Whatever we leave behind, we're inevitably going to leave some level of the work behind. And so, whatever all of us in our shared experiences can bring to that, and ensure that, the next generation can kind of carry that forth and go beyond what we could. Whatever problems we don't solve, whether it's how we start taking back enough of our land, or how we pivot our economy away from some of these things. We need to do some of the legwork to get them there rather than just handing off the baton and thinking that's enough. So, Kyle talked about some of the wins we've had already, and I don't want to leave those out because when we talk about anti-imperialism, it can feel very weighty and very exhausting, just thinking of all the things that we have to deal with already, of, the Ko'olave and Makua Valley. We talked about the leases, the military leases just coming up on this Friday, but, it is rare for us to have an opportunity of 5 years heads up of, hey, this thing is coming down the pipeline, right? But we know the leases are going to expire. And so it's a privilege of ours, a very lucky privilege of ours, that we have an opportunity to take action ahead of time, to plan ahead, to think about these things. Not in just I'm going to write some beautiful abstract for a conference. No, these things need to be going out into the community and making sure that other people are aligned, getting on the same page and educated about what's coming, because what inevitably will affect all of them is our inability to communicate and educate on those things. And so, I want us to think about that moving forward, and in this conversation kind of bring that forth of the need to take action beyond, attending these conferences and things like that, and take up the kuleana of it, not shy away from our kuleana of independence, not just for ourselves, because if we ignore it, we fail every other person in the world. Not just our next generation, not just the people sitting next to us today, not just our ancestors, but people we've never met, people in Palestine, people in West Papua, people in the Philippines, people in Guatemala and in Latin America, in Brazil, and other places around the world that suffer because the U.S. trains their governments on how to bomb them. Yeah? So I think I'll leave it there, but I want us to kind of bring that energy into the room today around not just talk, but action, because that's what's going to change the world here.
Mahalo. So for such a rich beginning. So I love the way that you guys tied in the genealogies of your own families, but also building in that geographic tying in and the socio-political aspects of it. So I am conscious of time and the fact that we did start late. We're going to actually go a little bit later, but I would like to see whether or not anybody has any questions. Okay, right around.
Check one, check one. I left it on. Good. Okay. Hi. Aloha mai kako, mahalo nui. I'm Junho. You know me as the person who's running sound right now, also first year Indigenous politics. Thank you all for this talk. I especially like Kyle and Kawena's discussion about the insidious, about the action that we need to take about the things happening right now. And this is something that I've recently been looking into. Are any of you familiar with challenge academies? Challenge academies are put on by the National Guard that recruits into the Army and Air Force to take at-risk youth and dropouts to recruit them into a 17-month, 6-month militarized program. And these are ways in which they take people who are disenfranchised from westernized school systems and disenfranchised beginnings and teaches them into forms of militarized experience. I'm used to institutions like this because when I was in San Diego, the Border Patrol Explorer program, which teaches you how to be a good Border Patrol agent, was also doing recruiting there. And I started looking into all these programs of recruiting youth and recruiting the disenfranchised because they are failed by a traditional education system to instead believe that a militarized education system can be what pipelines them right into militarized bodies. As we begin to think about how to directly affect the populations around us, especially the youth, especially the next generations, I guess my question for all of you is, how do we begin to ensure that the at-risk youth, about how the younger generations do not fall into these pipelines when they are struggling? What alternatives can we provide? What ways can we ensure that these are not the ways that they are recruited into militarism as an alternative? Where do we take over instead? Thank you.
Mahalo.
First of all, can we just give it up to the sound crew?
We're talking to the pillar. I think it's great that you brought up challenge academies because I think that's so a lot of us know about JORTC or whatever the freaking acronym is, but that of those kind of programs for that generally are in educative systems. But I think the challenge academies are particularly exploitative because they target exploited or at-risk youth. But yeah, I think this conversation around what we can do, because like you mentioned, these Western systems of education are not serving all of our people, right? I'm Hawaiian, and I'm one of the very few in my family to go to college. There's also, and the fact that my family has a couple people who've gone to college is a rarity amongst our people as well. So we need to be thinking about that. The majority of our people are in public schools, and even our public school system is failing them. And so one of the groups I'd like to highlight is Hawaii Peace and Justice. Joy Inamoto's in the back there, who's done a lot of youth organizing work and offering that kind of alternative to things. But it can't just be that, right? They do small cohorts around demilitarization work and these kind of these like sort of like spring break camps to like educate the next generation on some of these things. These kind of ideas, these counters to ROTC programs or challenge academies, and really focusing on our most at-risk community members, I think is super important here. And like I said earlier, whatever people are studying in the university, that privileged information that they would not otherwise have we need to really brainstorm ideas to bring that out into the community. So I saw Keanu Sai here a little earlier. One of the things he's done is do these community discussions, and now the language of occupation is like synonymous with the conversations around independence. I think that's something we all need to be thinking about a little bit more, regardless of where we stand on some of these things, of the need to kind of have these modes of discussion around these topics, right? And not thinking that our people can't understand them, because they can, right? Our people are living them every single day, right? And have a much more at hand or hands-on complex understanding this than some of us who have been very lucky in our lives to go to college or anything else like that. And so ways of brainstorming or ways of thinking of what we do to change these things, I think, going out into the community is one thing, and figuring out how we interact with community spaces and building those relationships with our communities to kind of have those alternatives and getting in there early. Not waiting for people to have the awakening in college like I did, like Kyle mentioned that he did, right? Because for so many of our people, that's too late, right? We need to be getting there earlier, right? We need to be interacting with them when they're younger. We need to be getting to that, we need to be offering our people alternatives when they're in high school and things like that, So I think that's very valid.
So I think it's, sorry, I just want to just a question. I think that's a great question. It's important to keep in mind militarization is more than just wars, right? It's a social engineering process as well. And especially in Hawaii's case, the junior ROTC programs were early examples of the Americanization project. It's like they went for the Hawaiian school, Kamehameha schools, then they went for McKinley High School, Little Tokyo High, to institute these programs as a way of creating new colonial subjects that are, have a particular political ideology and orientation and loyalties. And so that's something that we've seen, and in some of the previous work with AFSC, we were doing counter recruitment outreach, especially schools like Farrington, which are like 90% students of color, a lot of them Filipino and Pacific Islander, and heavily targeted for recruitment. We had a program that was doing some counter recruitment, and it was amazing that these the institutions were so biased against peace activism. It was like there was a preference for letting the military recruiters come into the schools, pull students out of class, without parental permission. When you didn't opt out of the release forms because of the No Child Left Behind Act, students' names are going to recruiters. If they would offer the ASVAB tests, the aptitude tests, free, right? Other career aptitude tests you had to pay for it. So when the military offers it for free, the schools offer it and students get it, but they don't see that their scores go to the recruiters right away. So these were all loopholes with which the recruiters were getting a hold of our young people, and we had to work with communities to and push the DOE to shut down some of those things, to say, hey, there's no informed consent that you're giving these names over. You should restrict access to names and scores unless they opt in, right? Turn it into an opt-in. So those are some of the things we were trying to do, but I think, yeah, that's a great question. The challenge academies use kind of the difficulties that youth are facing as a way to then pull them in. And we need to develop other alternatives. If we could pay more for students to do aloha aina work, just imagine what a change that could be, moving forward. I mean, we need it. We certainly need it, but we don't have the opportunity, the ability to offer those kinds of jobs, unfortunately.
Sorry, this is such a rich question. I just have to jump in on it too. Militarism as a social engineering project. I love that. It's definitely a gender project as well. And I'm talking about, not just the women outside the bases, but the women inside the military also, and I'll just share, I had a Filipina immigrant young woman in my US Empire class who was in the US military with a lot of other Filipina immigrant young women. And she learned about the Philippine-American War. She learned about just how devastated Manila was by World War II. And she just wept in class. She just wept in front of everybody and said, I feel wounded. I feel wounded by this information, And she asked her friends, like, have you heard of this Philippine-American War thing? And none of them knew what she was talking about, And this is a huge part of, what I'm trying to do. Our military recruiters are at UH West every week. So they're really worried about their numbers dipping, So what I said before about, the stories are within our genealogy if students are told that that genealogy is worth investigating, and that their stories are important. I actually had another student who interviewed her Filipino grandparents for my US Empire class, and she could ask them anything they wanted, but the first question had to be, what do you think when I say the term US Empire? And the grandmother said, who was a teacher, this is a part of the woke mob. This is these revisionist historians that are trying to discredit America, I don't approve of this kind of language, etc. Her grandfather, the soldier, the veteran, said, oh, you mean like when America goes to the Philippines or Guam and then takes over the country? Oh yeah, US Empire. I know what you're talking about. So it was a reminder to me, and she was training to become a teacher. So I think the training of teachers is so critical. I'm so proud of the Filipino Curriculum Project, another example of youth activism. People don't know. Yeah, I'm so proud of HPJ, the Youth Leadership Camp, everything that's been created. These are festivals of resistance. I'm also interested in connecting with veterans. The crisis in veteran suicide, the crisis in sexual assault within the US military, Vanessa Guillen's murder, I know was a wake-up call for a lot of people. I think that these are, if we approach it in the right way, even within our families, the phrase I use, I did like a report back when I came back from the Philippines and talked about my Lola's church being burned to the ground and said Philippine-American War, a lot of my veteran uncles. And they didn't say anything, but I just used the phrase, I want you to see me as a resource. I have access to all kinds of materials, and it doesn't feel right that I share these with students and not with my family, And so I try my best way to not be that person so eager to lecture, my family, but to just be a resource, to be that resource. That's my best response.
Aloha, Susan Gorman Chang. Just a bit about my genealogy. I'm a white settler. My husband is ethnic Chinese. His family has been here for generations, the Changs and the Tongs, and we trace it as far back as 1898 in Maui at a birth. So I'm part of the Shutdown Red Hill Coalition, and my question is about Navy, you were saying earlier, caricatures and of activists and Kanaka Maoli, and I just want to give you an example, and maybe you have a lot more experience about this, and tell me if this is a familiar strategy. The Navy has said they don't want to come to any more Community Representation Initiative committee meetings until we have mediation with them. They would like that behind closed doors because they are physically afraid for their safety when they come to these meetings. So I would just like you to talk about that strategy between the behind closed doors as well as the being, and I'm on the committee. Do I look threatening? I'm 62 years old. Yeah, so just if you could talk about that strategy and why they do that. Mahalo.
Oh, they scared you guys, yeah? I don't, I mean, I think, and you can ask Henry Curtis here too, who's Life of the Land, and he's been the community co-chair of the Pearl Harbor Hickam Joint-Base Pearl Harbor Hickam Restoration Advisory Board for like a long time, and I've sat on it for a number of years too. The Navy has a really closed culture and very paranoid, and it's like they got beat up on Red Hill, so they want to minimize their exposure, I guess, to criticism, and I'm sorry. Too late, yeah. Too late.
My exposure to fuel in my water too.
That's right. So I mean, I'm not surprised, but it is kind of. I mean, it's like I don't see what, why that's such a big deal. You folks have asked pertinent questions and have just been insistent, and maybe that's what they don't like, is that you keep asking the right questions. I don't know. I think. I don't know if they can force that. Is that something that's in the charter of doing a?
Yeah, we're still working on it, because the EPA is also involved.
Right.
That's just created,
Like with the case of the RABs, which are under the Defense Environmental Restoration Program, there are like mechanisms for dealing with conflict and things like that. And they have shut down, the Navy has refused to participate in certain RABs where it's been more contentious. So that happened at Fort Ord, yeah, was one of them, where they had conflict with the community, and then they just said, well, we're just out of here. So it's not unusual, it's not unprecedented, but it is something that they've done. And if they don't come and present, then what can you do? You can have the empty seats, but they still hold a lot of control over the information. So yeah. So yeah, thanks. Anybody else want to?
I mean, yeah, the fact that they're not showing up, I think, is an indicator of how well we're doing. Also, if they're scared, oh, bro, same. Like, I'm not the one with all the guns in Pearl Harbor, but yeah, I mean, like you said, the empty seats are great for media and stuff like that, and I think also the important thing of if there's the standing invitation for them to play ball with the community, if they like, then the EPA and the community and whatever other stakeholders can kind of have those meetings, and then it falls on those federal agencies that kind of push the military in whatever channels they have, which I know are limited, but at least, I think part of it comes down to two parts. These kind of meetings, the table has been set. It's up to them to come or not, and if they choose not to, then we'll play their game at their table without them, right? And then, I think the media pressure of that continues to build and build and build on that. And I think that's part of why the campaign to shut down Red Hill was at least somewhat successful. It's not done yet, but, because at some point it becomes untenable for them to continue acting in a way of just arrogance and pushing off the community, because if they continue to do it, it gets worse and worse and worse, right? Until suddenly they can't go out in public without being harassed for it, which I think should be the goal of this too, of like, oh, you're out, so you've got time to go Costco run, but you get no time to go make sure our water's not poisoned, kind of thing. But then there's also the aspect of like the role of these forums, the role of these tables is not the end all be all, right? Because at the end of the day, these tables are not necessarily being built for us, right? They're being built for us to have the conversation, but at the end of the day, what needs to happen is us flipping the table, right? So it ends up with the work of our community groups is to go interface with these, the military and whatever groups are bringing harm against our people, and then go back to the community and do the work there of getting people out in the street, of getting people, educated on these topics, because then at that point, it continues to build our pressure. And so no matter if they show up, it's okay. You don't have to show up to the meeting. We'll show up to your house, Like, you can't run from us. We're on an island. You can, maybe the Navy can. They'll get on their boat and leave. But I don't think any of us would complain about that, So I think at that point it just becomes of, okay, if they're not willing to come to the table and sit with us, we need to build the organizations capable of attacking is the wrong word, of addressing them, on our terms, right? If they don't even want to play with us going to their table, fine. Well, now it's our table, and now you have to come be a guest in our house. So I think of the work of like Hawaii Peace and Justice, of Hui Aloha Aina is another one, of community organizations building power in the community to kind of take these fights forward. Even, you know, the Red Hill Coalition, right, of bringing people together, bringing concerned people together in order to carry it forward without them in the room, right? At this point, it's enough for them to not show up or like talk from behind their press releases and stuff like that. If they're gonna do that, fine, we can play the game too. We'll talk to the community and then we'll show up 1,000 strong outside your base and you'll have to lock down your gate for a little bit and then, you know, maybe we'll move, maybe we don't, you know, kind of thing.
I'll just say a little bit, you know, the logic that they're scared, you know, I'm again thinking about the 10-year anniversary of Jennifer Laude's murder. You know, this transphobic Marine used the argument that he was afraid of Jennifer Laude. You know, this man, and the lawyer, Virgie Suarez, pointed out, you know, you're trained to kill. You are a Marine who is literally trained to kill, and this is this trans woman just trying to get through the day, who's like trained as a, you know, beauty parlor worker, you know. So yeah, that exposing the ridiculousness of those arguments, I think, is really important. Instead of like letting them get away with this idea that they're the, you know, officer and a gentleman or whatever, you know. Again, bringing up this you represent death. You represent death even for your own soldiers. You don't even, you know, that central contradiction, I think, is so important. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, there's a time and place for mediation. But this kind of, we also, I worked for a long time as a mediator, but we had public facilitation events too, where it was cameras on and it was a recorder, and because the stakes were high, and it was not just two people and their resources, but a public resource that's held in common, and you know, and a serious crime has been committed. There's no way that should be behind closed doors. Yeah. So thank you again, Red Hill Coalition, all the people who've worked on Red Hill. We're so proud of that. Thank you.
Can I just add a little bit to that too? I think these processes that they set up are kind of like a trap, right? It was meant to do this exact thing. So while we need to engage so that they can't say that we didn't step forward, we can't expect it to solve all the problems, and which is what Kawenaʻa is saying, the organizing has to continue in the community to build power, but those are points where you have maybe some access to information, some ability to wrest some degree of I don't want to say control, because we don't really have control over the process, and that's by design, right? So, but thanks for staying vigilant on this tip. Thanks.
Do we have other questions?
I was sitting back there trying to figure out a way to frame this as a question. So I'm going to ask, as was just mentioned, that there's many different communities out there and a lot of activities going on. So I guess the question would be, do we need a community for these communities? And I bring it up because we talk about silos. And the opposite of being a silo is all these connecting and sharing. And I think, this is why I was trying to frame it as a question, so it's not me just talking about stuff. But I do think that part of the reason is, in our society today, in our lives today, we're busy with these, 40-hour work weeks, and we don't have time to do other things. And the solution one of the solutions I'm always for is kauhale, where we're all together living nearby and whatnot, so we just have time to share. But so then I'm thinking, we have Hui Aloha, I know was just mentioned. We have civic clubs, which another plug will be, I'm a president of a civic club that we could bring together people. And then there's Kamakaku or Vai Vai, where we can just get together or have like a regular night where maybe once a month, once a quarter or something, where all these different, let's call it, because I'm just looking at the poster, the Ku'e folks get together and just share what's going on in the communities so that we can kind of connect and understand. So I guess the question again is just the need for a community of communities, and if you guys have thoughts on that.
Mahalo. Mahalo. Anybody want to jump in?
I'll just burn time for the smart people to answer. I think that's a really good way to put it. Of we need, whether you call it a community or a forum or just a space, like you mentioned, to kind of come together and have these discussions. alive for these things. But I remember, I've always heard of Uncle Kekuni Blaisdell kind of convening people every week to kind of talk about these things, and I think that's, something that that tradition has not necessarily been carried on as much, or right, of like this regular time for all these groups or folks to come together who believe in this thing, maybe coming at it from different angles, coming from different communities and that kind of stuff to address it. That's something I think we definitely should consider bringing back in some way, shape, or form to kind of, like you said, not silo ourselves, to come back together and be around each other in community to solve this together. Because I think one of the beautiful things about our movement here in Hawaii is we get plenty of different folks doing all the things from plenty of different angles, right? You get the Red Hill Coalition, you get Hawaii Peace and Justice, you get Hui Lahaina, you get the civic clubs, you get all the Malama Aina guys from Kanewai to Ulupo to Makua Valley guys, all the local ia'as, right? All these different groups are doing their work in different areas, and we're all, like you said, absorbed with our 40-hour work week of trying to just get through whatever task we put together. And we need to figure out how we can carve time out to kind of bring ourselves together, not just in Hawaii, but beyond. Part of this conference is talking about Puerto Rico and Cuba and other places as well. We need to start having those discussions with each other, because those opposed to us are having those discussions with other people with their side as well, across boundaries and borders and all of that kind of stuff already, right? We need to start adopting some of that for ourselves. So I think that's a great thing to put forward, of this idea of building a community for our communities to come together in whatever shape or form that takes. But I think a part of it is going to require us to meet people where they're at, to go to these communities and start that process rather than just opening the space to be like, okay, come. Because, you maybe get a few people if you get free food, but otherwise, I think it's probably better for us to approach each other's communities and then extend the invitation that way and, lend a hand and guide each other to that space together. Because I think that'll be most effective at bringing us together. But yeah, just my 2 cents.
Thank you for that point. I think that's super important that we have spaces to come together and converge that are not overly structured, right? Overly formalized. And so cafes, salons, pubs, these are all like places where revolutions were fomented. And spaces like Ava bars and stuff like that, right? Those are important, that they just are spaces that are free to talk and meet. So I wasn't around for much of it, but before, when the what is now the UH dorm over there, the YWCA, when it had all these offices, the different clubs and stuff had offices in that building, and then what's the cafe called? Does anyone remember? The Coffee Line. That was like a space that was just like there where folks would come and drink and coffee and talk story, and then they have open mics, right? So the occupation of Halava Valley to Block H3 kind of comes about because Kawai Puna Prajin is there, and he's like, hey, you guys got to go down, and there's this stuff going on. And so that type of space, we don't have many of those anymore. I think we need to try to proliferate that stuff, but it is super valuable. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate that question, and I also actually appreciate everything that everybody has been saying. Particularly, Kawenaʻulaokalā, you mentioning meeting people where they are. So I do a lot of work in the public humanities, and I think the danger often is that we're talking to a lot of people all the time that we're preaching to the choir, and we run the danger of believing that there are a lot more of us than there are. So then when you start going actually out into the general public, you realize, oh wow, a lot of people don't really know this. Like you were talking about elite knowledge. I think that's absolutely true. And when I think about, my father is one of those people. Filipino Chinese, been in Hawaii since the mid-19th century. Very much bought into the American mindset, and it's probably taken me about 40 years of talking to him to get him to shift, right? And I would actually say that he's like probably representative of a lot of people. Another thing that I want to mention too is that I work in the women's prison. And that's definitely a place where you basically have to go to that community to be able to talk to them. And I really, really want to push the idea that nobody is not worth talking to. And one of the things that I've heard over and over again, because in that system, particularly the women's, I would say like probably 99% of the charges that they're there for is drug related. And most of them will actually say they didn't start doing drugs and then feel bad. They started doing drugs because they felt like they had no other option. There was nothing else to do. And that's true for so many people, right? So I think one of the things that I also want us to think about in terms of building community is, yes, we totally need to have, they have to have this elite knowledge, but also, I mean, remember talking to a number of them and they said, you know what, there's nothing I can do. So also giving hope, you know, giving actionable things that it's just like, okay, so what can you do to make your life better? And what can you do to help in the community?
I'll just offer this one thing. I'm also part of a on-again, off-again group called Decolonize, which is an offshoot of Women's Voices, Women Speak. And we had, for a while, something called Merienda for the Mind, or Snack Time for the Mind, which was us connecting as younger activists with some older activists. And I just want to say the name Auntie Gwen Kim, who was a mentor of mine and just provided a lot of leadership that I really respect. And I would love to bring some, maybe that's the best response I have to that idea, you know, making sure that those lessons are transmitted. Similar to what Kekuni, I think, was trying to do. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Okay, I just had kind of two thoughts. One was the whole notion of education. I wished, because I share similar experiences with these two over here where I didn't kind of think about this stuff. Growing up in Hawaii, you're kind of like clueless, right? Until I went to the mainland and experienced, you know, more overt racism kind of thing. And then I kind of, you know, wow. But education to me is super important, especially for the young kids, okay? And I think that we kind of need to get into the schools now at the elementary level to get them to understand, you know, instead of for the people who end up going to college and you know, get a little light bulb moment or whatever, but to have education be across the board for all keiki, you know, and I'm not sure how to do that because, of course, DOE and a lot of the public, the school systems are entrenched in, you know, the way it is, right? Okay, so that was one thought I had. The second thought was to the other speaker there, who was talking about getting the community to have conversations or whatever, and I was thinking, you know, rather than having a sort of us versus them, like versus the military versus whatever, I'm wondering if we could view the people who are in the military as just extremely ignorant and in need of education. So back to the education point, right? Where if we could bring them in and not be, I mean, yeah, a lot of them are kind of wedged in their positions, okay, especially like senior administrators or whatever. But if we could get them to come to the table in a non-threatening way, maybe they wouldn't have the red pill no show up kind of thing, and they'd be more open to hearing. Because it's their kids too that are getting poisoned by Red Hill water, et cetera. And I'm like, hello, what don't you guys, you know, you want to have your families drinking poison water? Is that okay with you? You know, that doesn't make any sense. They're human beings as well. But that community conversation piece that you were talking about, you know, that maybe we could kind of be more of an umbrella-ish kind of thing. I don't know how to do that, but those were two thoughts that I had. And then to your point where you said that you were working with marginalized women in the prison, I just retired from being a public defender for 34 years, so I went to the prison all the time. And I think a lot of the women suffered from, the drug stuff came out of a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and just generally, you're not worth anything over all the years that they were growing up. Dysfunctional families, which includes mental health issues, et cetera. And so we're all part of the big picture, really, and that's just another piece of it. So that's all.
We're pretty much heading towards the end. Do you guys want to give like a 30-second wrap up? 30-second apiece. I'm not asking you guys to do it in 5 seconds, although we could. Who wants to start us off?
Yeah, I think this community piece, I think, is super important of figuring out how we can bring, I think what Kyle said earlier kind of helps address this point too of like, there's a place for this table, right, of going to it, and then there's also the conversations we need to be having with or without them, because we, you know, in some ways we cannot wait, and then all, you know, and then once we've got this collectivism, we can kind of push them to come to the table, right? Maybe if the free food would work for them, we'll see. But yeah, I think, you know, that this kind of space offers us a lot of opportunities to brainstorm together what we can do to kind of address some of these issues, rather than, you know, we need to learn about the history and stuff like that, but we also cannot just like look at the history and be like, now I have all this knowledge, okay, I gotta go home now, right? Like, gotta carry it forth in some sort of way. So I hope everyone, you know, from this can go back to whatever communities you come from and kind of have these generative discussions amongst yourselves, right? So, you know, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to meet people where they're at. You know, that was just talked about earlier, but hopefully people here can go back to their communities, meet their communities where they're at, and then bring them all closer together, right? So that way we can kind of address this. And I think also one of the important things that I always harp on just in my own politics is we need to build organizations. You know, I think one of the things in my very short time in the Hawaiian movement has been seeing that we build a new structure every single time there's a new flashpoint, whether it's Ko'olave or Red Hill or Mauna Kea or whatever else. We need to start building structures that last, structures that address all of these issues in our community, not because then, you know, usually whenever it's a new thing, it's the same cast of characters under a different name, right? We're carrying a different umbrella, we all wearing different little shirt, but it's the same group of people. So we need to start building structures that our people have entry points into, to come into, to join with, to work under, but that allow us to kind of build this lasting community power, whatever you want to call it, organizations, WHOIs, whatever, I don't care what the name is. We need to start building these things because that level of organization amongst ourselves, amongst our communities, will really help level us up to a point where we can start to address this power. And if you're not going to build one amongst your own community, find one to join. I think that's always something we can do. You know, these spaces exist. Hawaii Peace and Justice, Hui Aloha Aina, just a few. Civic clubs were mentioned. Any of the nonprofits that run the Malama Aina spaces, these places already exist. You know, what we need is hands, right? Many hands make light work. We need people to start stepping out of their bubble, out of their comfort zone, and, you know, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's what it's going to take for us to start changing some of these things. Mahalo.
So first, on the point that you made about speaking to the military members, I think what we saw with Red Hill was that there was a breakthrough in many ways. Because military families were poisoned, many of them were not getting answers from their institutions, and they were getting more reliable information from the activists and the community groups. And so they started coming out, and some of those conversations are continuing, including on the CRI and other initiatives. And some of them came out to places like Makua Valley on access to give whole kupu and to also see. And so I think that that's important when those openings happen. But we can't expect that just sitting at the table is always going to be a fruitful conversation, because it depends on whether they're wearing their title and their role, or whether they're coming as humans to sit, right? So like what kind of institutional power are they representing, or authority are they representing in the conversation? And we're seeing them abusing that in the case of the CRI, where it's like, we're not going to come and, you know, talk to you because we don't recognize you as legitimate. On just moving forward, I think what Kawena's saying about organization versus activism or mobilization is so important, right? Like, we often think of, if we get 100 people to come out or whatever, that's a win, and it's a lot of work, but it doesn't sustain, and we do have this kind of tendency in Hawaii to see the mobilization as the thing, as opposed to the organization that continues to build power And we need that, right? So the slow, unsexy work of just talking to people, building infrastructures, building the systems that can sustain themselves, that stuff needs to happen so that when the event happens, the moment opens up, you can have an occupation on the mountain, you can have people occupying Kawenaʻulaokalā, and it can move to a higher level of activism. And I just wanted to mention also Kaleko Kaeo and Andre Perez talk about this, their formula of balancing between kukulu and ku'e. Like there needs to be kind of a ratio, and it might shift from time to time, but kukulu being like this building of foundations, and ku'e being the resistance. That there has to be a good ratio, otherwise you burn out if you're just doing ku'e, just resistance. And you can't just be working in the lo'i and building and doing kukulu. Sometimes you need to stand up and fight for that water, for that land or whatever. So they both have to be kind of in a proportional relationship. Thank you.
I want to let me just say two quick things. I really want to uplift what Marie Theresa Satori said yesterday about really caring for our activists and make sure that the young people don't get the message that you're just kind of sacrificing yourself in this solo kind of endeavor, and so to the extent that we can do that and build activist communities that really care about each other, I think that's a really important part of what you just said. And also, I had a little bit of a reaction to the idea that the military are just ignorant. It's true what you're saying. It's also true that we have Aaron Bushnell and the legacy that do people know Aaron Bushnell's name? He's the man who self-immolated was it a month ago, in solidarity with Palestine and the slaughter that's happening there. And he said, I do this in solidarity with the people of Palestine, and this, basically a refusal to see what the ruling class has determined will be the new normal. And I just want to lift up his name and the bravery and the witness that man gave, and that he actually was not ignorant. He was actually very knowledgeable about what the US military is doing in the world and a refusal to participate in genocide. And I think that maybe his story is another wedge for us to show we don't hate you, we hate the institution, we don't hate you. You're our brothers and sisters, our non-binary cousins. You are part of me, but we want to build a different world together where we can have non-violent jobs, green jobs, aloha aina jobs, proper ways to support our families, not just endless killing.